Okay. Hello, everybody. I am here and I am going to read to you. I'm going to read to you chapter 5. And this is behind closed doors. So it's got some details in here that I think are very important for anybody that wants to read. It's entitled The Lawyer, the Librarian, and the Cousin. It covers the year after the Duke of Windsor died. And this book has been very fascinating to read. It's about the untold story of the Duchess of Windsor. And I don't know anybody that is interested, but it just, to me, I found it very interesting because it gives you a little insight into some of the things the royal family tried to do for her. I mean, you can see they had a funeral and they tried to invite her to come stay at Buckingham Palace, but it felt, I don't know, I think she felt it was awkward for her to stay with them. But anyway, here you can see just some different pictures, and I just think they took such an advantage. So many people swarmed in to take advantage of her. She didn't have any children. She had some good friends, but she didn't have anybody to really look out for her in her old age. And the Duke left her quite a bit of money, and he left her a nice estate and he wanted her cared for. But, you know, so many people just took advantage. One of the main people that took advantage of her is this lawyer, Suzanne Blum. I'm going to go ahead and get started reading. Um, the Lawyer, the Librarian, and the Cousin, 1972 to 1973. Helen, Lady Harding of Penhurst, was the widow of Alec Harding, the man who had warned Edward VIII that the press was about to break silence over the issue of Mrs. Simpson. She heard of the Duke's death on the radio and observed, "Now we shall have her as a rich widow being sought after by all the royal family. It was the worse than that. The Duke of Windsor's death meant that certain administrative matters had to be dealt with, not least of all his will. The Duke's last will had been signed on January 6, 1972. It was simple and straightforward. He appointed the Duchess the sole universal legatee of all his movable and immovable estate wherever situated, in order that she should have immediate possession and enjoyment beneficially and absolutely on all his estate when he died. In the event of the Duchess predeceasing him, there were specific bequests for those still in his employ. The most generous treated were Sidney Johnson to receive £30,000. That was a lot of money in the 70s. The Sangries, the Bowers, Lucian Massey, the chef, they were to receive £20,000. Gregorio Martin, £15,000. Joanna Schutz, Giselle de Berry, Ronald Marchant, former chauffeur, Dr. Antonucci, all to receive £10,000. I'll skip over the rest, but he made quite a bit of um, um, bequests to people that employed him. The Duke's plan was that the Duchess should enjoy the full benefits of his estate during her lifetime. After her death, the residue of the estate would go back to Britain to be distributed for charitable purposes. And to that end, the Duke created a company called Rossmore Assets, a company legally constituted in England with its registered office at 9 Cheapside, London, the office of Allen and Overy, this company becoming the Duke's universal legatee. Okay, I just want to do a sound check to see if I am. Hello, hello. Hello, hello. Okay, I think I'm okay. So I read this chapter and the sound didn't record, so I just want to make sure it records now. Suzanne Blum, Sir Godfrey Morley, and Ronald Edgar Plummer were granted the seisin of his estate. The Duke's wishes were only fulfilled to the point that the Duchess benefited from the estate during her lifetime. The other provisions, and in particular the choice of universal legatee, were not adhered to. Some years earlier, between 1953 and 1959, at a time when the Duchess was around 60 years old and completely in control of her mental faculties, she made a note about what she wanted to happen to her houses, dogs, and the various possessions. I have seen this document, much of which is written in the Duchess's own hands. I appreciate that the document was no legal authority, but it is indicative of her wishes. As with the Duke's will, the wishes expressed were not fulfilled. The Duchess suggested that the museums and galleries should be found to receive the two Cecil Beaton drawings of her portraits of Elego Vidal Quadras, Riccardo Magni, and René Boucher. Her portrait by Martin was to be destroyed. Museums and galleries should also have the portraits of the Duke by James Gunn, Sir Alfred Munning, Dryan, and William Upham. The paintings by Fantin Latour, Bodin, Stubbs, and Bernard Lejour should find similar homes. Museums were to get the silver and the silver gilt with monograms, the Duke's uniforms, decorations, presumably also including his orders, his field marshal baton, his dirk, the abdication table, the illuminated addresses, and the Augustus Rex, King of Saxony porcelain. The Duchess singled out special friends to receive certain items. Mrs. Robert Young, widow of the American financier, who had advised the Duke so well over his investments, would receive a selection of four porcelain leaf dishes. The remainder of the porcelain and the china to be sold. Jewelry was to go to Mrs. Zachary Lewis, her first cousin, Princess Dimitri, the former Sheila Milbank, Marjorie M. Cutts Wilson, Miss Brooks, etc. Okay, I'm just going to skip over that. The remainder of the jewelry was to be sold piece by piece or broken up. The Duchess wrote, regarding the jewelry, the ladies should choose between the smaller pieces, the large stones to be sold, as well as valuable brooches or bracelets. The Duchess wanted another cousin, Mrs. Herndon, to receive first choice of her clothes, the second choice going to Mrs. Douglas. She wanted gold boxes to go to the Earl of Dudley, and the red box to his daughter-in-law, Lady Edmund. The remainder would go to a museum or could be sold if money was required. The mill should be sold and the furniture there be offered to the Baltimore Museum. The remainder of the lease on 4 Route de Champ, the entertainment, should be sold. The Duke's clothes should be sold, but their photographs were to be offered to Lord Brownlow or to a museum. Their books, and in particular the books by figures such as Sir Winston Churchill and President Wilson, should be given to a library. The Duchess loved her dogs. She wanted Sidney to take the dogs. In the event of no suitable home would be found for them, and then they should be put down. The document was written at the time when Victor Waddilove was looking after the Windsors' affairs. He was to receive 2 walnut chests in the entrance hall of the mill, and the flower painting over the mantelpiece in the entrance hall of the mill, with Moulin de la Tour painted on the pictures. The Duchess's wishes were not fulfilled. Most of the items mentioned above were either sold in the 1987 sale of the Duchess's jewels in Geneva, or in the Fayed sale at Sotheby's in New York in 1998. For example, the 2 Cecil Beaton drawings of the Duchess, they were sold for $135,000 and $178,000. Her portrait by Vidal Quadras was sold for 9,000. Okay, it goes on to speak about the amounts that these were sold for. As we shall see, the James Gunn portrait of the Duke and other items such as Fidel Marshal's baton found their way into the Musée de la Légion d'Honneur by devious means. Soon after her return to Paris, the Duchess had three visitors in quick succession: her lawyer, Sir Godfrey Morley, the Queen's librarian, and Sir Robin Mackworth Young, and the mainstay of her London visit, the Duke's cousin, Admiral of the Fleet, Earl Mountbatten of Burma. On the 14th of June, 9 days after the funeral, the Duke's lawyer, Sir Godfrey Morley, came to lunch and talked to the Duchess about a number of plans. For many years, Sir Godfrey had dealt with all the Duke's important legal affairs. He had discussed the Duke's last will with him in 1971, and as related, the Duke had signed it on 6 January 1972. Sir Godfrey was a distinguished British lawyer born in 1909, the son of a KC, and had been senior partner of Allen Orby since 1960. He had served in the Rifle Brigade on staff at Middle East in Italy and during the Second World War. He was awarded an OBE and a TD. He had been a partner with Allen and Orby since 1934, and he had served as president of the Law Society and had been knighted in 1971. He sat on the Lord Chancellor's Law Reform Commission. He had dealt with the Duke of Windsor's affairs since 1936, and perhaps even before that. At times, this required sensitive handling. It was Sir Godfrey who had to deal with the Foreign Office when the Duke complained about lack of courtesy when he was in Texas for a checkup after his operation. It would have been hard to find a more honorable representative of the legal profession than Morley. A few days after his visit to the Duchess, Sir Godfrey wrote her a letter marked private and confidential, and it was to be opened only by the Duchess of Windsor. His letter raised important points. She had told him that she wished to move from the house, a recurring theme over many years. And she added that she wanted to get rid of John Utter as her private secretary. But Sir Godfrey dissuaded her from this on the grounds that Utter would be of great assistance in the winding up of the Duke's estate, and that she would need some help with her business affairs, her travel arrangements, and so forth. Miss Schutz, he pointed out, might not stay indefinitely. The Duchess had raised the questions of her will. Morley told her that there was no absolute necessity to make a new will because her will provided that on her death the legacies would be paid out after necessary payment to staff, after which things would go to charities except for historical objects which would go to regimental collections, archives, and so on. He pointed out that what did need to be addressed with the question of legacies to servants who might leave during her lifetime, plus any decision that she wished to make about leaving specific bequests to individuals rather than to charities. And again, whether she wanted her possessions all sold at death or whether some should be left to specific people. Sir Godfrey was interested in the disposition of historical objects and mentioned that the Grenadier Guards had inquired about any regimental relics belonging to the Duke. Finally, he said he needed to go through the Duke's files, many of which related to out-of-date business matters and could be destroyed as being obsolete. This advice was sound, and it was politely delivered. The Duchess signed a new will on 8 November 1972. It seemed that the wishes of the Duke were to be fulfilled, but not for long. The day after Sir Godfrey's visit, Sir Robin Mackworth-Young came to lunch. He came to collect the first consignment of the Duke of Windsor's papers and to take them to the Royal Archives at Windsor Castle. This followed the discussion between the Duchess, the Duke of Edinburgh, and Lord Mountbatten at lunch after the Duke's funeral 10 days before. Sir Robin was calm. He was a scholarly man who ran the Royal Archives with quiet efficiency. He played no part in the actual decision to move the papers. It was his job to collect them and, in due course, to have them organized and cataloged for permanent housing within the Royal Archives, where, if permission were granted, they would be available for study by respected historians, and they would be placed at the disposal of an official biographer. Sir Robin Mackworth-Young was born in 1920. He was a King's Scholar at Eton. He had served in the RAF in the Second World War and had then joined the Foreign Service. He had been appointed to work on Sir Owen Moorhead's staff at the Royal Library in 1955, and he had succeeded him as a librarian in 1958. To outsiders, he could be aloof, as befitted the guardian of a royal secrets. Though one evening at a reception in the Norman Tower of Windsor's castle, I observed him literally kneeling at the feet of Lady Diana Cooper to press her for views on the Windsors. On the day of his visit, all of the Duke's orders of chivalry, both of British and Indian ones, as well as those awarded by foreign and royal houses, were brought from the bank. They made an impressive display laid out in the office while Sir Robin went about his business. They were then taken to England with the papers, and they were displayed in the National Army Museum in Chelsea for over 20 years before finding a final home at Windsor Castle. It was generally felt that the Duke would have been pleased by this decision. The first two visitors had been calm and quiet, and acting with good intentions, the lawyer advising what he felt was best for his client, and the librarian fulfilling the Duchess' wishes. The following visitor was rather different. Okay. Admiral of the fleet, the Earl Mountbatten of Burma was next to arrive, hot foot from Britain. He came to see the Duchess at 5 p.m. on 30 June 1972, seemingly on a social visit. In fact, he was testing the ground before his full onslaught began. Without a doubt, Mountbatten had been supportive to the Duchess during her stay in Britain, for the Duke's funeral had done much to make it easier for her and the royal family. When they met at that difficult time, unfortunately, any good he did was soon undone, as he took it upon himself to resolve what he perceived as the outstanding issues concerning the disposition of the respective estates of the Duke and the Duchess. A great-grandson of Queen Victoria, born in 1900, Mountbatten had been a youthful ally to the Duke of Windsor when he was the Prince of Wales. In those days, the prince was at the very center of the world to which young Dickie Mountbatten had aspired. Mountbatten clawed his way on to the renown and sailed with him to India. There he met Edwina Ashley, reposing at Viceregal Lodge. She was rich and beautiful. He was dashing and ambitious, and he arrived in the princess' suites. Much to his financial advantage, Dickie married her. The Prince of Wales was his best man. With Mountbatten, it is necessary to peel away layers of fabrication before you reach the truth. He claimed to have been at the fort throughout the abdication, advising the king. In fact, he lunched there only once with the brothers on 10 December. Only then, by which time the matter was decided. He claimed to have taken the new George VI for a stroll and a chat soon after he ascended the throne. He claimed to have offered to be the best man to the Duke of Windsor at his marriage in France. On the contrary, he declined to attend, advising a fellow naval officer who was offered a job working for the Duke. The king is dead. Long live the king. He naturally allied himself as quickly as possible with the new king, George VI. Mountbatten's career advanced in leaps and bounds. He became the last viceroy of India. He pushed the alliance between his nephew, Prince Philip of Greece, and the young Princess Elizabeth. He rose to the top of the Royal Navy, ending as Admiral of the Fleet and Chief of the Defense Staff. Much of his life was spent constructively, positively, and forcefully. He was also a bully. A look at the scene in his film, The Life and Times of Admiral of the Fleet, Lord Mountbatten of Burma, when he orders his grandchildren about on a beach in Ireland, advising them of better ways to build their sandcastles. It is indicative of his need to dominate all those around him. Mountbatten's diaries make fascinating reading, since he was always firmly in the middle of them, and he was always right. He never failed to take credit for any suggested ideas, and perhaps not uniquely, only took in what he wanted to take in. When he saw old friends, he invariably recorded that they were delighted to see him, even if evidence suggests to the contrary. So far as the Windsors were concerned, he considered himself their only true friend within the royal family. Certainly, he considered that he could help and at times ease a difficult situation. Unfortunately, the Duke did not trust him, nor care for him very much, and the Duchess bowed to the Duke's knowledge of him. There came a point in the last years of the Duke's life when Mountbatten came over to France and showed the Windsors an extract from his film, the aforementioned The Life and Times of the Admiral of the Fleet, Lord Mountbatten of Burma. At a small cinema in Neuilly taken over for the occasion, John Utter remembered the evening as the only time he ate caviar and hot pastry, a delicious dish devised by the Duchess. On that or possibly a different evening, the Duke and Mountbatten sat down for a late night chat. The Duke said to him, "Dickie, I've got a bone to pick with you. Why were you not my best man?" The Duke felt badly let down by the Mountbatten over his wedding. This was an issue that played on Mountbatten's mind over the years. He took every opportunity to press his version of events onto biographers such as Francis Donaldson. When he met Lady Alexandra Metcalfe in Greece in 1953, she recorded, "I sat by Dickie, who got on his usual subject with me, the Duke of Windsor and the best man story." There is a hint in Mountbatten's diaries that there has been some cooling off between himself and the Windsors. Dining alone with the Duke in Paris in February 1970, he noted, "We seem to have caught the old spirit really even more than in the 1930s, and I must say, I thoroughly enjoyed the evening." A few weeks later, there was another visit. So I went around and had an hour's further gossip and tea when he repeated for the third time how much he had enjoyed the dinner with me. On this occasion, Mountbatten began to ask the Duke who he intended to leave certain objects to, suggesting the Prince of Wales. The Duke commented later, "How dare he? He even tells me what he wants left to him." Some years later, John Utter confirmed that Mountbatten was a pest. The palace were always saying they tried to find things for him to do. Otherwise, he poked his nose into things. If Mountbatten telephoned the Duke of Windsor, he would say, "And what does he want now?" It was unfortunate that Lord Mountbatten should have begun his campaign about the disposition of the Windsor property at a time when the Duchess was being harassed on all sides. And so often happens to widows, friends of the deceased begin to make claims for objects they craved. Winston Guest, an American friend, was keen to take possession of some New Zealand Jade Marys for his collection. Then his wife, CZ, pronounced CZ, some dubbed her Sleazy, began to inquire about her jewelry. She expressed a particular liking for the Duchess's earrings, hinting how much she admired them and how sorry she was that Winston had never found her such a beautiful pair. The Duchess was extremely upset by this, and in her weakened state, she cried about it. She felt under pressure that she could no longer enjoy wearing her own jewels without her friends trying to purloin them. The Duchess still had loyal friends like the Countess of Sefton, Lady Monckton, Robin and Iris Bear, Grace, the Countess of Dudley, and many in Paris who invited her to their homes, including some young people. But there were times when she appeared confused. Several guests attested over the years that sometimes they gathered for dinner, and it seemed that dinner was being delayed. When someone asked why they were waiting, the Duchess would reply, they were waiting for the Duke to come down. The Duchess's health declined steadily after the Duke's death. She had been suffering from ileitis, an oncoming of Crohn's disease. Nor did she eat properly, being determined to retain the figure of a young girl, which she achieved with considerable success, but at the cost of her own health. Digestive difficulties were a considerable problem. Shortly after the Duke's death, Diana Moseley wrote to her sister, "She's ill, that's for certain. I am glad he died first. He would have been in total despair without her." She was known to survive on nips of vodka, which eventually took their toll. When pressed in a television documentary made by Desmond Wilcox in 1997, Monsignor Martin said the Duchess did not drink too much. The problem was that she did not eat enough. A persistent story spread that she suffered from arteriosclerosis, and that there were good days and bad days as a result. That sometimes she just sat there, unable to communicate, and then there were other times where she was quite normal. Joanna Schutz, who was with her closely during these years, is adamant she suffered from no such illness, and that until November 1975, she was quite capable of coping with life. Her lapses of memory over whether the Duke was alive or dead resulted, she believed, from the Duchess being unable to fully register his death. He had been with her day and night, more or less without a break since their marriage. He had spoiled her, and he had done everything for her. The Duke had been worried about her memory before he died. All this combined to create these lapses. Between 1972 and 1975, there were photographs of the Duchess at society occasions in Paris, going out for lunch or dinner or arriving in New York for her annual visit. She was photographed strolling along the beach during her holiday in Baratz that August. Snaps were taken of her sitting in her garden, and once there was a paparazzi sequence of her on her terrace attempting to swat an annoying fly. There were occasional interviews, at least one photo session in the house in Paris, in which the Duchess was posed in her sitting room with her pugs and even in her greenhouse in the garden. Those who met the Duchess were concerned about her. Richard Rene Sylvan had been hired by the State Department to prepare a management analysis and an assessment of the American hospital. Perry Colley soon appointed him acting administrator of the hospital. He saw the Duchess when she came for board meetings, and he became something of a friend, occasionally escorting her on outings, he recalled. I worried about how frail the Duchess was, how little she ate, and how much she drank. Ulcers were inevitable. It's not easy being alone, being widowed, and in her case, I think it was doubly hard. On the 3rd of August, 1972, the Duchess went to the Hotel du Palais in Baratz with Grace Dudley, Carol von Radwitz, and John Utter. The Duchess took a suite with Grace Dudley, each having their own bedroom and sharing the drawing room. Von Radwitz was a director of Moet Chandon with an unlimited expense account, traveling from San Francisco to Nassau, to Palm Beach, and to Baratz and elsewhere. The Duke of Windsor had liked him as they could speak German together. He was good to the Duchess in Baratz, which resulted in a curious incident at the end of her stay. The Duchess always gave a dinner party for the mayor and others, and this time the Baron took it over for her and ordered all the food, so John Utter did not have to. The first course was a specialty of the house, a single lobster appearing before each guest. For 8 people, these lobsters came to $125, and the whole bill was from $500 to $600. Although this was an enjoyable evening, the Duchess was so out of tune with contemporary restaurant prices that she was very upset. She was convinced she could not afford such an extravagance. That was key. The Duke left her quite a bit of money, and she never really had to pay the bills. So she always worried about money after he died, when she actually was left with quite a bit of money. On the 5th of September, Diane Vreeland visited her soon followed by Winston Guest. On 14th September, she attended a farewell lunch at George V's hotel for retiring American ambassador to France, Arthur K. Watson, and on 29 December, she dined with Paul Louis Weiler at his house in Rue de la Fançonnerie. She signed herself in his book, The Duchess of Windsor. Grace, the Countess of Dudley, and Edmund Bors was also dining. In October, there were visits from her banker, Maurice Amaget, Lady Monckton, and Robert Beer, and Ambassador Watson. On October the 17th, the Duchess went to the American hospital for an inspection of her leg. Sir Godfrey Morley and his wife visited her Paris lawyer, Maître Suzanne Blum, and on 20 October. And on the 6th of November, she paid a final visit to the mill before it was sold the following summer. On the 13th of November, she was back in the American hospital to have a cyst removed from her knee. The operation was performed by Dr. Maurice Mercader the following day. She nearly died on the operating table and was given strong drugs which affected her brain for some time. A nurse came to look after her and began to think she had a chance of inheriting some jewels from her patient. Soon after her return, on the 3rd of December, the Mosleys lunched with the Duchess in her house in Bois. Lady Mosley described her as pathos personified. About 9 people, including a nurse in a green silk dress, and she, the Duchess, tried to set the ball rolling by saying nowadays people are only interested in sex. As well, we were all well on the way to the grave, and the ball refused to roll. However, it was all very jolly. The food was to dream of, and she is a genius for food. On the 13th of December, she had a second visit from Robert Mountbatten-Windsor Young, who stayed for lunch, on which occasion, with her permission, he removed more papers for Windsor. It was a feature of the way the press treated the Duchess of Windsor in the first year of her widowhood that they still tried to associate her with a scandal. Okay, we're wrapping up. This is almost the end of the chapter. As time went by, that became of less interest to them than the state of her declining health. France de Much and the reporter Baron d'Odral had long been the scourge of celebrities, especially at times of crisis. Towards the end of 1971, France de Much had prepared an edition concerning the death of Maurice Chevalier, complete with his last words and intimate descriptions from his nurses. But the old star had rallied, and the edition had to be scrapped. They now concocted a fantasy that the Duchess was about to marry John Utter, pretending that they had first met in their youth and that now they were free. And they have decided to unite and live together in the autumn of their years. Anyways, that was a false story. Okay. John Utter was in London when this story broke, and on 20 December he received by the Queen, who bestowed him an honorary CVO on him in recognition of his years of service to the Duke. During his audience at Buckingham Palace, the Queen told him that there was now another grave at Frogmore, not far from the Duke's, that of the Duke's nephew, Prince William of Gloucester, who had been killed while taking part in the Goodyear air race on the 28th of August. The Duchess was ill at home between the 16th and the 22nd of December, and during that time, King Umberto of Italy called on her. Over Christmas, the Duchess fell out of bed, and though in considerable pain, was not given proper assistance. When Miss Schutz came back to work on the 2nd of January, she realized the Duchess had broken her hip and immediately called the doctor. So she was taken back to the American hospital and underwent an operation on the 4th of January. On her return from the hospital, the nurse gave the Duchess a cocktail of drugs, possessed by the idea that she might inherit something from her. At one point in terror, the Duchess hid in her bathroom and called Miss Schutz from there to ask her to come and rescue her. The Duchess then asked Miss Schutz to get rid of the nurse. Once this had been done, the Duchess made a courageous recovery and was soon walking with a stick and then unaided. When the Duchess was in the hospital, Mater Suzanne Blum, her Paris lawyer, took the first step to assuming control over her. She dismissed Sir Godfrey Morley as her British lawyer. Okay, and that's when this lawyer, Mater Suzanne Blum, she was crooked as they come, in my opinion. Because this lawyer, Sir Godfrey Morley, that's the one that the Duke wanted to protect the Duchess. It's sad when you get older and you don't have anybody to look out for you. And that's the sad part of the Duchess of Windsor's last years. But I will read in the next chapter, Bloom and Lord Mountbatten. It's sad. The vultures just came in and swooped around her. People wanted her jewelry. They wanted the artifacts. I mean, it's sad, but it's a very interesting story. And this Behind Closed Doors, the tragic untold story of the Duchess of Windsor. It's written by Hugo Vickers. You can find this book on Amazon.com. It's not on Audible yet. Otherwise, I would suggest that you listen to it on Audible. But I'm just going to read this out. I'm committed to reading this until the book ends, and that way you can listen to it for free if you're interested in listening to me. So I'm going to be reading this over the course of the week. Thank you very much for listening and have a happy new year.